And how about the government's role in all of this? Ethanol subsidies were popular at the beginning, and now people are starting to question whether the state should be subsidizing not only a viable but a successful industry.
Well, the biggest subsidy that occurred with regard to ethanol was with regard to those plants that were built prior to 2000. And we agreed to pay, we promised these companies that built these plants that we'd pay them a tax credit going over, I think it was a 10-year period of time. And over the last 4 years that was changed. We shortened the credit and then extended the time period in which it was paid, essentially borrowing the money, if you will, from these cooperatives
and what do you think
companies.
Of that?
I don't think that's right. If the government offers an incentive for production, you got to keep your end of the bargain. You can't turn around halfway through and say no. If you do, no business is going to respond to those type of incentives in the future if the government takes them away. There's no doubt right now that the demand for ethanol is way up, and we're seeing roughly another 100 million gallons coming online at this point, 90% of which I believe is owned by companies outside of Minnesota. It's not community-based. Certainly in those cases I would not encourage any type of subsidy going in, simply because if we're going to do that, I want it to be homegrown. I want it to be benefiting those communities in greater Minnesota. The co-ops that were created, certainly I believe that they should have been subsidized. I think it created an industry, and I think that's wonderful. Any subsidies that you get into this area really, I think, ought to be tied to having it locally owned.
And how about the ethanol industry? Should the state be supporting it? It was popular at the beginning to help incent the industry, but now that it's successful, should the state be in the business?
Well, the state's role, I think, is to inspire the private market to take chances, to invest, to research, to get things going. And so, in the mid-1990s, people were wondering about our ethanol initiative. It's turned out to be a wonderful saving grace for the country that we were able to demonstrate that ahead of the curve, ahead of the crisis. And now we've got the opportunity to do that in many, many other areas. So our role, I think, is to identify the goal, which is to get a different and better energy mix for our citizens, then incentivize the pioneers to demonstrate that it's doable, can be done, to get it up and running in our state.
And how about the ethanol industry? Do you think they don't need help anymore? Do you think they need more help? What's the balance? Because that's starting to get to be quite a hot debate.
Yeah, well, we need to fulfill our commitments to the ethanol industry. We told them some years ago that if you invest in these plants, there's going to be a producer payment for you, which is a form of subsidy. We should keep those commitments. But it's starting to look like with the newer plants that are built in the Job Z zones, they don't need the producer payments. They can just be in the Job Z zones. And most of the new plants that have been built in Minnesota aren't even on the subsidy program. They're in the Job Z. They're not on the producer payment program. They're in the Job Z zones.
Do you want to expand Job Z?
Yeah, with Job Z zones, they're a tremendous success. They've kept or created over 12,000 jobs in the state of Minnesota, over $200–300 million worth of capital investment. If you go around greater Minnesota, they'll tell you it's been a real success story.
What about your opponents who say it's a drain on taxes and we're missing revenues because of them?
It's worth it.
Well, the state needs to do something pretty dramatic now with ethanol. We've got the industry up and running. There's no doubt about that, and it's expanding as fast as it possibly can. But it's going to hit a wall. You can't consume, half the corn crop and most of the water in southern Minnesota and not hit this wall. And that's the problem I see, is that we're not thinking far enough ahead yet about what's the next generation, what's the next technology. That's where the state actually does have a role, investing in the basic research at the University of Minnesota or someplace else designed to create that next technology, and then maybe providing additional subsidies for the development of that next technology that doesn't consume so much of the corn and actually uses, say, the corn stalk or the switchgrass or trees or whatever, and also uses a lot less water. I think the big environmental challenge on ethanol is going to end up being water, and we're not prepared for that. We're developing an industry that's actually going to, in a way, kill itself if we don't get this next technology in place.
How about some of the other biomass issues? Minnesota is the first state in the nation to have the turkey manure plant. Down in Benson, Minnesota, they're burning turkey manure. And it seems like there are other things besides, switchgrass and corn where there isn't, it's never going to expire, right?
Unlimited
the quantity.
Supplies.
Yeah.
Well, there's a wonderful example of a dairy farmer up in Princeton who takes all the manure from the dairy herd, digests it, turns it into methane. That drives the generator that powers the entire dairy operation. Then he uses the leftover manure to fertilize the fields that produces all the food. I mean, he's actually created this amazing example of a self-contained operation where energy is part of the process itself. We have to look at all of that. We have to look at small-scale energy generation. My brother-in-law and my sister live in a home where they generate all their own electricity, they generate all their own solar, they pump their own water, they're not on the grid anywhere, and they lead a pretty nice lifestyle. So it's both this big-scale stuff that we always talk about, but I think we've also got to think about the small-scale opportunities that are out there for individual businesses or farmers or even homeowners.